Night gripped the city with a heavy hand as streetlights flickered to life along the battered roads of Bricksdale. Through the thin fog that clung to the pavement, Leroy and Lamar drifted unseen, ghostly silhouettes against the gritty skyline. Their mood was tense but determined. They had come too far and died too painfully to back down now. If the crime syndicate and its mysterious Kingpin thought they could silence anyone who dared challenge them, Leroy and Lamar planned to prove otherwise. They had discovered that the Underworld had caught wind of their haunting presence. More thugs were on high alert, yet the duo refused to retreat. Instead, they would strike a calculated blow, and Lamar's new plan was dangerously simple. Lure one of the syndicate's men into a trap using the city's own technology. Lamar's knack for technology had been evident long before their deaths. As a teenager, he'd spent late nights tinkering in his cousin's repair shop, often fixing old radios or jerry-rigging cell phone chargers. Now, in his ghostly form, that aptitude had transformed into something eerily supernatural. He could manipulate cameras without direct contact, coaxing them to twist and pan or flicker in and out. He could even cause streetlights to surge with voltage, blinking like bizarre signals in the dark. "It's all about funneling this guy," Lamar explained as he and Leroy hovered above a lonely intersection. Beneath them, a row of glitching traffic cameras swiveled on their mounting poles. "We'll make him think his only safe route is through the old Bricksdale building." "How sure are we he'll follow?" Leroy asked, peering down at the deserted street. "Sure as the grave, man," Lamar replied with a grim chuckle. "We just have to dangle the right bait." They got their chance soon enough. A burly man in a black hoodie, one of the syndicate's foot soldiers, skulked around the corner, pistol tucked in his waistband. Lamar had done his research. The cameras would flicker ominously, and the streetlights would fail in just the right sequence to force the target onto a single path. Sure enough, the thug found every street blocked or mysteriously darkened, as if the power grid itself wanted him to turn left instead of right. Growing uneasy, he headed straight into the looming shadow of the Bricksdale building's courtyard, just as planned. The Bricksdale building had once housed a successful import-export company. Now its windows were shattered, its metal gates rusted. Vandals had left behind graffiti in layers so thick the original brick was nearly invisible. Stories floated around Bricksdale about haunted corridors, unexplained footsteps at midnight. Leroy almost smiled at the irony. Real ghosts were about to claim the building as their lair tonight. Inside, the hallway walls peeled like old skin. Flickering exit signs sputtered, casting weak red glows onto stained floors. Leroy and Lamar willed their ghostly forms to stay hidden, waiting for their prey. The thug crept past a row of decrepit offices, the tip of his pistol shaking slightly, sweat shining on his forehead. "All right, man," Leroy hissed to Lamar. "Let's give him a nice, warm welcome." Lamar nodded, fixing his gaze on a corroded fuse box. As he concentrated, sparks snapped in the darkness. The overhead lights buzzed to life in a sudden burst, revealing Leroy standing in the corridor, an apparition with burning, vengeful eyes. "Looking for us?" Leroy asked, voice reverberating unnaturally. The thug yelped and stumbled backward, his gun rattling off a stray shot that rang through the stale air. But Leroy was already drifting out of reach, and the bullet only clanged against metal, echoing into emptiness. I knew it. The thug rasped, eyes darting around for an escape. "They said ghosts, but I?" His words died as Lamar materialized behind him, ghostly tendrils of power rippling along the corridor, causing the half-dead lights to blink in rhythmic pulses. Panic set in quickly, and the thug spun again, index finger trembling on the trigger. "Listen up," Lamar growled, voice humming with barely contained fury. "We know you work for the syndicate. We want answers about the Kingpin." The man swallowed hard, glancing from one ghost to the other. I don't know any Kingpin personally. I just do what I'm told." Leroy's eyes flared. "Then give us something. A name, a location, or we'll show you what a real haunting feels like." Shaking violently, the thug opened his mouth, when a sudden crash erupted from deeper within the building. Before any of them could react, a black-clad figure vaulted through the broken doorway at the far end of the hall. In an instant, the new arrival pinned the thug's arms, forcing the gun from his hand. It clattered across the floor. Leroy and Lamar hovered in disbelief. This newcomer moved with lethal precision, wearing night vision goggles pushed up onto a hood. The figure's grip on the thug was almost casual, yet the thug gasped for air, eyes rolling in terror. "Who the hell are you?" Leroy asked, ghostly voice echoing down the hall. The figure twisted the thug's arm painfully until the man whimpered. Then, in a disturbingly calm tone, he spoke. "I'm just here to clean up. Orders from above." Lamar narrowed his eyes. "Above? You mean the Kingpin?" The figure released the thug, who collapsed to his knees. But the intruder's gaze stayed on the empty air where Leroy and Lamar hovered. "You're the ones spooking the syndicate. Let me guess. You're the ghosts my employers warned about." Before Leroy or Lamar could respond, the intruder pulled a curved blade from a sheath at his waist. In a flash, he turned and drove the blade straight toward the thug's chest. A sickening wet crunch echoed, and the thug's eyes bulged in pain and shock. He gasped once, and then his body went still. "Hey!" Lamar shouted. "We needed him alive." A grim smile played on the intruder's lips as he wiped the blade on the thug's hoodie. "Dead men don't talk, and neither do I, not without incentive. But I'm not just another hired gun," he said quietly, words dripping with the confidence of a true professional. "The name's Salazar, and I'm on a mission to eliminate any threat to the syndicate's plans. That includes ghosts." Salazar advanced 2 steps, seemingly unfazed by the fact that he was addressing thin air. Leroy and Lamar parted, each ready to unleash their spectral powers. The overhead lights sputtered. Dust stirred in the corners as an unnatural wind raked the corridor. But Salazar didn't waver. "We faced guns," Leroy snarled, letting anger flood his voice, "and we don't fear them in death." "Guns, guns," Salazar scoffed. "Oh, I'm far more than a trigger puller." Without warning, Salazar hurled a small device toward Lamar's silhouette. It emitted a sharp, high-pitched screech, like nails on a chalkboard. Lamar clutched his ears, or tried to, though as a ghost, it was more a reflex than anything physical. A jarring wave of static blurred his form, momentarily robbing him of focus. "A spectral disruptor," Salazar said calmly. "Cost me a fortune, but it's worth every penny. If you're as dead as they say, that screech'll feel like it's clawing at your soul." Leroy lunged, summoning enough telekinetic energy to wrench the device's remote control from Salazar's grip. He flung it down the hallway, where it clattered to the floor and sent sparks skittering across the tiles. For a second, Salazar faltered, allowing Leroy to manipulate the overhead lights in a strobe effect aimed at disorienting him. Lamar, shaking off the disruption, fueled his anger into another wave of telekinesis that toppled a row of half-collapsed shelving units directly at Salazar. The assassin darted aside with fluid grace, but the falling debris cornered him near the building's old break room. Leroy and Lamar pressed the advantage, ghostly forms swirling with rage. You think you're unstoppable," Salazar coughed, stepping over the debris. His cold eyes glinted in the failing light. "Well, try unstoppable hunger. Kingpin is dabbling in things beyond this world. You might notice you're not the only spirits in town, but that's not my problem." "Then whose problem is it?" Leroy demanded. Salazar shrugged. "Whoever the Kingpin chooses to feed to the beast he's nurturing. I just do the killing or the cleanup." "But you too? You're an anomaly, a big, messy glitch in the plan." It was becoming clear. Salazar was no mere thug. He was a specialized hitman, potentially with resources to handle supernatural threats. Their trap had worked, but on someone far more dangerous than they intended. Leroy tried to maintain the upper hand, forcing Salazar toward a dead-end hallway with his spectral manipulations. The lighting flickered, the camera feeds buzzed with static, and battered doors slammed shut one by one as Lamar exerted his full power. Salazar's breathing quickened, yet he wore a cold smirk. "I see. Box me in. Close off escape routes. Smart. But you might want to hear what I have to say before you decide to drag me into ghost hell." Lamar loomed closer, intangible arms outstretched. "Why would we listen to you?" Salazar's smirk faltered. "Because I have information. You want the Kingpin, right? There's another name you should know. A man who's been slithering behind the scenes, setting up deals, forging alliances with something not from this world. His name is Vito." Silence gripped the corridor, broken only by the hiss of a broken pipe overhead. Leroy and Lamar exchanged a glance. They had grown used to hearing names whispered in dark corners, Marcus, Pablo, and others. But Vito felt different, weighted with a threat they couldn't fully grasp. "Vito," Lamar repeated slowly, testing the word on his tongue. "Who is he?" "He's part of the Kingpin's inner circle," Salazar replied. "But not just any henchman. He's the man who introduced your Kingpin to, well, let's call it the unholy side of power. If you want to dig into the real depths of Bricksdale's nightmares, Vito's your path." For a moment, the swirling tension eased, just enough for Leroy and Lamar to register that perhaps Salazar's intel might be genuine. Leroy forced himself to stay focused, remembering how easily a skilled liar could manipulate them. After all, they had been manipulated right into their own graves once before. "So," Lamar said carefully, "are you giving us this name to buy your freedom?" Salazar's gaze hardened. "I offer the name in exchange for my life. Killing me might feel good, but it won't get you any closer to the Kingpin, or stopping whatever supernatural horror he's unleashing." In the stuttering lights, Salazar's pale face looked almost ghostly itself. Leroy felt a flicker of doubt. Was Salazar truly frightened of the Kingpin's conjured evil, or was he just playing the angles? Leroy had to decide if vengeance outweighed the chance to learn more. For several heartbeats, Leroy and Lamar floated there, spectral forms flickering in the gloom. Salazar braced for another assault, but Leroy closed his eyes and let out a long, shuddering exhale, though ghosts had no real breath to give. "We'll spare you," Leroy said at last, his voice echoing like a distant thunder. "But if you're lying," Salazar shook his head. "I'm not. Find Vito, and you'll uncover the Kingpin's darkest secrets, and you'll realize your brand of revenge is child's play compared to what the Kingpin has planned for Bricksdale." Suddenly, another presence stirred in the shadows, a creeping coldness Leroy and Lamar had felt before. The robed figure that haunted their nightmares appeared at the corridor's edge, hollow eyes fixed on them. Salazar saw it too, and for the first time, real fear coursed across his features. That's the Kingpin's watchdog," Salazar gasped, voice trembling. "Move aside if you want to live," Lamar laughed bitterly. "We're already dead, remember?" But the robed entity made no immediate attack. Instead, it seemed to exude an aura of hunger that set every fiber of Leroy and Lamar's ghostly forms on edge. They could almost taste its malevolence, like rancid air pressing in from all sides. Salazar, in a sudden burst of terror, sprinted past them, leaping over debris with a survivalist's grace. Leroy and Lamar were left facing the robed menace, which let out a low hiss like 1,000 roaches skittering across a dusty floor. A swirl of nauseating black smoke rushed from beneath the entity's ragged sleeves, lunging at Leroy. Instinctively, Lamar used a surge of telekinesis to shove Leroy aside, sending him through a wall. The smoke slammed into the bricks, dissipating with a frustrated hiss. The robed figure glided forward, but Leroy and Lamar, fueled by fear and fury, combined their energy in a violent wave of flickering lights and telekinetic force. The walls trembled, dust rained from the ceiling, and for an instant the figure wavered, then vanished into the gloom. Panting as though they had lungs that could tire, Leroy and Lamar exchanged a shaken look. The building fell silent, save for the distant groan of old beams and the drip of leaking water. "This is getting worse," Lamar muttered, his voice hollow. "The Kingpin's not just a crime boss. He's dabbling in stuff that makes us look normal. Leroy stared at the dead thug's body sprawled nearby, and then the spot where Salazar had vanished. And we just got a name, Vito. The flicker of dying electricity played across Leroy's and Lamar's spectral faces. They had set a trap, but it had nearly been turned against them by a cunning, well-equipped hitman. And lurking behind him was an evil no bullet or blade could explain. The Kingpin's monstrous ally had shown itself again, a harbinger of nightmares swirling just below Bricksdale's rough streets. "We should find Salazar," Lamar said finally, nodding at the battered hallway before he warns the Kingpin about our next move. Leroy hovered a few feet above the ground, a fierce resolve igniting his ghostly eyes. "No, we find Vito. We need to choke off the Kingpin's pipeline to the supernatural. Salazar will come to us eventually. He can't hide forever if that robed horror is after him too." Somewhere outside, a siren whined in the distance. Maybe the city's response to yet another violent disturbance. Leroy and Lamar drifted to an exposed window, gazing down at the lonely, shattered streets below. All that remained in the corridor behind them was the stench of blood and the echo of panicked screams. They had survived another encounter, but each clash seemed to draw them deeper into a world of demonic shadows and mortal betrayals. The name Vito rang in their minds like a warning bell. They didn't know if it would lead them to answers, or to a fate worse than the bullets that once ended their lives. Yet, the mission was clear. Bricksdale's darkest power had to be dismantled, piece by piece, even if it meant diving headlong into the roiling pit of nightmares the Kingpin had unleashed. Outside, the wind whistled through a broken alley gate. Leroy and Lamar vanished into the bricks, ready to scour the city for this mysterious Vito, prepared to unravel the Kingpin's deadliest secrets, and bracing themselves for whatever abomination the robed figure represented. The trap was set, but the real snare might be waiting for them in the black heart of Bricksdale's underworld.